Hey, F5 community, welcome to our quarterly security notification coverage. I will be joining you momentarily with Jason Rahm and Aaron Brailsford. Thanks for holding on. Hello and welcome, F5 community, to our quarterly security notifications for October 19th of 2022. I'm Aubrey with Dev Central, and I have Jason Rahm with me today, as well as Aaron Brailsford from F5's Security Incident Response Team. We're going to be able to answer any questions that you may have for the QSN live after we take a look at the overview video that we have prepared with Aaron. We'll see you on the back of this. Hello and welcome, F5 community. The time has come again for another quarterly security notification. So I'm here with Aaron Brailsford from F5 Security Incident Response Team to get all of the details about the release. Aaron?
Thanks, Aubrey. Yep, that's right. So we're here to talk about the October 2022 security notification. This is the fifth or sixth of our regular QSNs that we moved to at the back end of last year. So I think everybody's getting used to them now. Just to give you a brief overview, disclosure began at 7 a.m. on October the 19th. That's Seattle time, so it's obviously done by the point of view that you're watching this video. The QSN schedule is always published in advance, so the date for the next QSN is now live at the article number there. We'll pop that in the description. And there is an overview article for this QSN, as there is for every QSN, that will give you a rundown of everything that's included, all of the vulnerabilities we've disclosed, security exposures and so on, so you can easily find impacted versions, the mitigations and so on. There is no impact from anything we have disclosed to any of the F5 services like Distributed Cloud, or Threat Stack, Silverline, nor is there any impact to Big IP Next CNF, SPK, or Aspen Mesh. So some of these issues are not fixed in version 13. Exposure for those issues is limited to either specific configurations or platforms, or is only exposed via the control planes, for which obviously a good control is to ensure you limit access to the control plane. That is TMUI, the web GUI, TMSH, and so on. All mitigations are available. Obviously, version 13 hits end of software development December this year, December 2022. So although it is end of technical support December 2023, no vulnerability fixes or bug fixes will be made available after December. So it's a good idea, if you aren't already planning to really plan to move to a later release. You'll be able to consume fixes faster, and 13 will be, as I say, end of technical support December next year. Just to give you a quick breakdown of the issues, there are no critical vulnerabilities in this QSN, so that's good news for everybody. There's nothing that is an absolute showstopper in here. We do have 12 highs. Those are predominantly denial of service vulnerabilities. Denial of service vulnerabilities predominantly affect specific configurations, so do check to see if your configuration is impacted when you want to understand your risk. As you can see, we have a coverage among a number of products here, mostly Big IP, but we do have 3 Nginx vulnerabilities, and I'll talk about those in a little more detail in a couple of slides' time. A couple of things that impact BigIQ, and a couple of things that impact F5 OS. That might be the first time you're seeing that in a QSN, so check those out if you are using F5 OS. As always, if you are on the latest releases, any of the latest releases at the point the QSN is published, you're in a good spot. With the exception, as we talked about, of version 13, which only has some of the fixes for this QSN. But if you're on any of the versions on screen, you're in a very good place. Obviously, do check through just to make sure, especially if you're on version 13 or BigIQ. I think 8201 for BigIQ fixes some, but not all of the BigIQ impacts here. F5 OS, if you're on 1.2 or later, or 1.5 or later, for F5 OS A or C, you're in a good spot. Nginx here is the first time I think we've had to talk about this. These are the latest releases in each of the latest branches. There are actually fixes in Nginx 1.21, I believe, for Nginx open source, and R26 for Plus, and R1 for OSS subscription, just in case you're in it on any of those. For Nginx, it is a good idea to try and be on the latest branch if you can. So just to highlight those Nginx issues for a second, there are 3 Nginx issues. 2 are reported to us by an external researcher. 1 was discovered internally. They are limited to a very specific configuration. So they only impact the MP4 module and the HLS module. Those modules, HLS is unavailable on open source Nginx, so you're definitely not impacted if you are running open source. MP4 is available, but is not enabled by default. And in Nginx parlance, enabled actually means compiled into the Nginx that you're running. In any case, while those modules are compiled into Nginx Plus and OSS subscription, they are only in use if you actually have them referenced in your configuration files. So there are examples in the security advisories that you can go and look at to quickly determine whether you are or aren't actually using that functionality. And in both cases, for the MP4 module and the HLS module, you're only impacted if you are serving potentially maliciously crafted MOV or MP4 files, so H.264, for example, files that are stored on your server that you are streaming out to remote clients. As long as your content is trusted, then you are also not exposed. But if your content is potentially untrusted and you are using these modules and you have them configured in your configuration files, you're potentially exposed. So do check out the security advisories for those if you fall into any of those camps. And that is it. That is all we had this QSN. Like I say, it's not a big QSN. There are no criticals, so there's no huge showstoppers in there. There are a few things to be aware of, like, if you're on 13X, maybe pay special attention to those. If you are running Nginx, then pay special attention to those. Just take a look at the advisories. But other than that, it should be a quiet one for everybody, I hope.
Thanks, as always, Aaron, for delivering the news to us on this quarterly security notification. And thank you, F5 community, for tuning in. Have a great F5 day. All right. Thanks, F5 community, for watching that. Hopefully that was a good overview of today's quarterly security notification. I've also brought on with me Jason Rom from Dev Central and Aaron Brailsford, as you just saw, from the security incident response team here at F5. Good day, guys. How you doing?
Hey, Aubrey. Good, thanks.
Fantastic. So, any quick thoughts, Jason? What'd you think about the overall QSN?
Well, excuse me. I think just like Varen made a comment in there. Relief, no critical vulnerabilities. That's always nice when you can just breathe out a little bit, right? So that's good. And I did, one of them caught my eye just because I love the iRules and all that. There's an iRules one out there, and so if you if you aren't ready to make the jump and patch right away, make sure you evaluate your iRules out there. And if you're doing any kind of HTTP collect action, you might want to prioritize your patching. So I'm always interested when I see the ones that are not necessarily directly system related, but dependent on some of your configuration.
Certainly. And it was my interesting bit was that there was quite a bit of Nginx Plus on there this time. That was it's neat to kind of see other products on there that are not just Big IP and Big IQ. But always good to see no criticals. I guess, Aaron, if you have kind of any thoughts to wrap, it looks like we don't have a ton of questions in the chat today, which is, I think, judging by the smiles on our faces, a good thing. So, thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the fact that there are no criticals in there means that there's a whole lot less pressure around this QSM. And there's a question in the chat, I think, about sideband iRules that is one of the iRules specific CVEs that's in this QSM. Sideband iRules, there's actually a page on the iRules reference all about sideband iRules. It gives you a list of all of the ways that you can initiate a sideband connection. Sidebands basically are any time that you have a connection coming into the big IP, your iRule fires off based on that client-side connection. And then as well as the connection, you would exist to whatever backend infrastructure, whatever node that traffic is being passed to, you have the big IP actually initiate another connection. So you have like two backend connections essentially coming out. Anytime you're doing that, then for obvious reasons, you need to take care in general. But there is a specific list of commands you probably want to audit your iRules for to see if you're using sideband stuff.
Now, is that node command included in there? That is something that we've had a couple questions on here as well.
So that's actually two separate things. So there is let me pop this in the private chat, and then you guys can add that up on the sideband connections. The node command issue, on the other hand, let me just pull up the CVE for that. Where's it gone? Is it gone?
And I've just added the sideband link. That's pretty easy one to remember. Sideband in all caps, in case you're...
Yeah, so there's the sidebands vulnerability, which is CVE 2022-41624. That talks about sideband. We also have CVE 2022-41833, which is HTTP collect that Jason mentioned. And we have another one in here, I believe, which I cannot find.
The node. Kyle had a comment on here. Thanks, Kyle. If an attacker can control the arguments of node, they can point the command at stuff you may not want them to connect to internally.
Yep, that's the one.
Yep.
For which I can't remember the CV number now. I'm just looking at it. Oh, is it that one?
Yeah, and Kyle, if you have that handy, I'm looking for node here.
And for a lighthearted moment while you're looking that up, Rodolfo said, since you're keeping it short today, how about a demo on some of those games on your awesome vintage computers back there?
It is indeed an Amiga, and Yeah, if I turn it on, it might even boot. Maybe. It's got two 30-year-old hard disks in it, and one of them died, so there's a good chance if I turn it back on again, the other one's probably died in the meantime.
Yeah, my avionics professor in college was a huge Amiga fan, so we nerded out over his stuff a lot.
It's what got me my start in computing. Well, actually that, and well, you can't see it behind my giant head, but just there is a ZX Spectrum. That's one just for the Brits watching. Or a Sinclair Timex for the Americans.
You said Zed.
I did.
That may work for Boo as well, as he is Canadian.
Yes.
Well, okay, there's the sideband, the 41624.
Yeah, 41624 is all about sideband connections, which is actually anytime you're basically doing the command in iRules is connect. That's like the key one to look for, right? Anytime there is a connect in iRules, you are opening a sideband connection.
And we can maybe take a look at this together too. So
yeah,
that could work. This is the 624 is the sideband, so this would be the SIP. And then the iRules. There should be one more, I think. Nope, that was it. So
you see the two.
Yeah, I
so
do.
Kyle,
only see the
maybe
two.
context if you have that.
Yep, absolutely, Kyle.
Josh, I had a question here. Does APM rely on sideband at all internally? And I would say no. Knowing how the APM's built on a plugin architecture, and so that is independent of the iRules engine.
Yeah, my understanding was some of those loopbacks internally are responsible for that. Occasionally, we see the 127 dot addresses on the big IP.
So it's an interesting point worth raising. Maybe is that when we evaluate any area of vulnerable code, regardless of what product that vulnerable code is in, right? So iRules you would typically think of as being in LTM. We evaluate the impact of that vulnerability across all of the products or all of the modules in the case of big IP. So we would look at, does this iRules thing also impact APM or SSLO or, any of those other modules that are licensable, F5 DNS, for example. So if it affects it, it should be called out in the advisory. You would see an entry in the table of vulnerable versions, the specific modules that it impacts called out after big IP.
Do you distinguish in the way that you call it out? For example, like an iRules one, within an APM, you have the ability to use a sideband connection, but the sideband connection itself isn't an impact to APM. It's just an impact to sideband. So would that be called out as an APM, even if APM can take advantage of that?
So that's a good question. So if you look at the sideband one in particular, there you go. If you look at 41624, if you go into that.
Yep.
So this being a slightly unique case in that it's iRules rather than product functionality. You can see the impacted product is big IP all modules because all modules have iRules. Yep. But the vulnerable component is specifically iRules. And we try and be as specific as we can in the vulnerable component or feature without getting down into the weeds of, say, internal product architecture, right?
Right.
So yeah, if you were using an iRule with APM to do a sideband connection, you would be vulnerable to this. But if you were just using APM without iRules, without an iRule that does a connect, you're not impacted by this. That makes sense.
Yep, totally. Yep. Yeah, thanks for that clarification. Because I was always interested in how that distinguishes, or how do you distinguish between an impacted component versus an impacted product?
Yeah, we try and be as clear as possible. If anybody's been watching our advisories over the last year or so, I guess, we've made an effort to use standard language everywhere and start referring to everything in a sort of standardized way. There used to be more variance, I would say, in how the vulnerable component was called out, sometimes in a way that was not immediately useful to customers. And we try and be more, basically refer to everything in the sense of the functionality that's exposed in the product, rather than sometimes we would be talking about, an internal component or something that's much less transparent.
In case you're not familiar with the security advisories, I do also have a forthcoming video on how to read the security advisories with Dharminder Rana. So that is actually called out in that video as well. Watch for it if it's something that you're interested in, the standardization of those.
Yeah, and so that'll be a great video to go and watch. It'll cover off, I'm sure, a lot of the common points where we see people trip up, such as reading the applies to box on security advisories, which is maybe not obvious. So definitely go and watch Dharminder's video.
Okay. Well, I think I have not seen anything else coming up in the chat. So I guess
I don't know if it's shown up on your side, but Kyle thought maybe it was the August QSN, and I did find it. I posted it in the chat. The node one for the iRules may allow an attacker to bypass the
They will
access
start
control
to
restrictions for self IP.
Yeah, they will start to blur after a while. We're on this quarterly treadmill. I guess the one last thing that I would call out then, I would just repeat the message that was in the video about version 13. It goes end of software development, December this year, which means there'll be no more bug fixes, no more vulnerability fixes. For a period of 12 months after that, until December 2023, we will still evaluate it for vulnerabilities as to whether it's impacted by something that impacts later versions. But even if it is impacted, it's not going to get a fix. So really, the time to be looking into moving off 13 was probably 6 months ago, but really be aware that deadline is looming. And if you're sitting there thinking it's fine, it's still under technical support, it's only end of software development, just be aware that does mean we stop fixing vulnerabilities for that branch. So yes, you have 12 months grace, but it's 12 months grace where you're probably making extra work for yourself. You're going to have to apply mitigations, and let's be clear, for the I think 6 things that are disclosed in this QSN that aren't fixed in 13, there are either and possibly all 3 of these mitigations, or it only affects specific hardware platforms, or only affects specific configurations that you can easily audit for. But you are building yourself into a position where you will have to either, for the next 12 months, always look to apply a mitigation or inspect your config, or make sure you're not on an affected hardware platform. Whereas if you're on 14 and you are on the latest branch of 14, the latest release of 14 rather, that you would have those fixes available, and mitigating and resolving that issue is as simple, I'll maybe put that in air quotes, because I know that if you have a vast estate, this is not necessarily simple, but updating to the latest release.
That is correct.
Yeah,
and I'm sure
thing I would add to that is we have upgrade paths. I just posted that in here. It's article K13845. So from 13, you can get to 15. You can't get directly to 16 or 17 from 13. So if you're going to make a jump to latest, you got a couple jumps to make, which will take planning. And I'd recommend you do that. It's a pain to do a double upgrade, but with automation tools, which we highly recommend you go to, it's not as painful. But the more you stay on the older versions, the more of this work that you have to do. And so I highly recommend you move forward. I know that we still support 14. I would recommend you move at least to 15 if you're on 13. Get at least to 15 because that only requires a single jump from 13 to 15. So there's the upgrade paths for you, and plenty of tools out there to do automated upgrade, or automate your upgrade paths.
And yes, definitely, Josh, it can be a little bit daunting to upgrade for sure. But I got to tell you, having covered the sales engineering side of things for more than a decade, most of the customers that I saw that did not upgrade had a harder time with that in the long run. So definitely, as Jason said, always best to get your upgrades in as soon as possible. How to hardening CV. Okay, we had one more comment here as well from Mohammed. How you doing? But on that, I think we've got we've got a pretty wrapped up show here today. I think good that we've had no criticals. We always like to see that sort of CVE, avoided for sure. And I did want to thank Aaron and Jason for being here today. Even when it's a light day like this, it's always good to have, your team at your side when you come into the tough days. So I wanted to have, one last reminder as well for people that the next, right, we want to make sure that we have an understanding. The next QSN is February 1st of 2023. That's February 1 of 2023. And as always, Dev Central will have the most up-to-date information for you in conjunction with F5's Security Incident Response Team. One more time, thank you guys for being here today. And as always, have a great F5 day. Hello and welcome, F5.